broadcast debates. To move the motion, I call Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker, and it's my great pleasure to formally move the motion standing in my name and the name of my right honourable and honourable friends. Mr. Speaker, you are the first amongst us to raise whether the public thinks we're doing a good job of debating one another, and whether we get it right or wrong. You, sir, I think do a much better job of ensuring debates happen than the broadcasters do. And if I may say so, in ensuring that all the relevant people turn up to debates, including ministers. Certainly in this Parliament, ministers have been made accountable more so than in previous Parliaments, and for that I'm sure the whole House is very, very grateful indeed. And as we turn to this debate this afternoon, with just over 8 weeks to polling day, there are as many questions as ever about the proposed television broadcast debates. Who's debating whom? Who's invited? Who's actually going to turn up? When are the debates happening? The fact is that on not one point has agreement been established, and we have heard again today at Prime Minister's questions the controversy continues to rage. It is a completely unsatisfactory and deeply disappointing situation that we find ourselves in. And before the broadcasters report critically of those of us here, they need first to ask, what have they got wrong in this process? Did they engage constructively and sensibly with all the parties? Can they honestly say that they have had at the front of their minds the interests of the voters, their viewers? Or has the self-interest of the broadcasters not been rather too evident in much of the many mistakes that they have made so far? When, Mr. Speaker, we put ourselves before the voters, we hope for a fair hearing. Does anyone think that broadcasters have had that rather than ratings and spectacle in mind? And if they did, how does one explain their oscillation from one format for debates to another one? I'd be very happy to give way.
Very grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. Did he welcome, as I did, the intervention by the noble Lord Grade, former chairman of the BBC and chairman of ITV, so he knows what he was talking about, that the arrangements for these debates are deeply flawed?
Honourable gentleman for raising that point, because I think the intervention in the letter to the Times this morning by the noble Lord was a very interesting intervention and a very pertinent one. And I think that in all of this it is very interesting to note that someone who may have party political affiliations but who is so experienced in terms of broadcasting both for ITV and in the BBC world is speaking so forthrightly about the way in which broadcasters have handled this. And particularly, I think it has to be said, Mr. Speaker, in relation to the BBC, which has a particular responsibility as a public broadcaster to be fair and impartial to everyone. And I think that one of the issues, and I will give way in a moment, but one of the issues that concerns licence payers in Northern Ireland of the television licence fee is that the deliberate exclusion of Northern Ireland parties when other parties from Scotland and Wales who only stand in their respective countries is something that really does ask serious questions of impartiality and fairness of the BBC in particular. I give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman very much for giving way, and I very much agree with that last point he makes, because I think it's no good the broadcasters saying that the Welsh nationalists and the Scottish nationalists can take part in these debates if the parties from Northern Ireland can't take place, and I think he should pursue his case very vigorously.
For the honourable gentleman's support, as indeed I'm grateful to the support that has been evident and has been put to us by members on all sides of the House. And indeed, I have letters here from the leaders of other parties throughout the United Kingdom defending and supporting our inclusion in these national debates. But let me make it very clear, and I will give way just a minute. Let me make it very clear what our position as the Democratic Unionist Party is. We want to see the national debates happen. We do not intrude ourselves or ask to be involved in a national debate involving the national parties. For instance, we're quite happy that there should be a head-to-head debate between the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, or indeed a debate organised amongst those parties that are deemed to be national and of sufficient standing, who stand in all parts of the United Kingdom. We didn't raise any objections to that or ask to be included naturally in that. But when the broadcasters decided that they would invite the SNP from Scotland and Plaid Cymru from Wales to be involved in this national debate, then that opens up the question as to why do you include a party that only stands in Scotland, a party that only stands in Wales, but you don't then include the Democratic Unionist Party, which has more MPs and more votes than Plaid Cymru, for instance, has more MPs than the Greens, Plaid and the SNP put together. I mean, the whole thing is ludicrous. Now, the argument that is put forward by the BBC, and we met the BBC, although I have to say this, we met the BBC at our request after they had brought forward their second formulation. They never once came and asked to speak to any of the parties, as I understand it, in Northern Ireland. Indeed, not only did they not speak to the political parties in Northern Ireland, but as I understand it, the BBC mandarins and functionaries didn't actually come and speak to their own journalists in Northern Ireland. I'm not sure what happened in other countries and regions of the UK, but they took this decision without actually having consulted people directly involved in Northern Ireland. And when I hear them talk about consulting with all the parties, it's very, very clear they have not fulfilled their obligation because they haven't consulted with us, despite our size and despite our contribution and despite the potential in terms of a hung parliament going forward after the 8th of May. So these are serious questions, particularly of the BBC, that need to be answered. And I reiterate today our position that we are only concerned in terms of the national debates because of the fact that other parties are going to be involved from their own countries and Northern Ireland is to be excluded. And there will be people in those national debates who put forward candidates in Northern Ireland, and therefore it is prejudicial to Northern Ireland parties, particularly to the DUP. Now, sometimes it's said by the BBC and brother broadcasters, well, there will be local debates happening in Northern Ireland amongst the main parties. And they say also that that is the opportunity for Northern Ireland politicians and parties to debate in front of the Northern Ireland electorate and set out their policies and all the rest of it. And that is all fine and well, and we have no objection to debating in that format whatsoever. But there will also, as I understand, be such debates taking place within Scotland alone and within Wales alone. So, yes, let's have the Northern Ireland debate, let's have the debate in Wales, let's have the debate in Scotland and broadcast, but we're talking about the national debates. So you cannot have one rule for some chosen arbitrarily at the whim of unaccountable broadcasters who decide what is best for everyone else. And have a different rule for Northern Ireland. I think it is totally unacceptable. Sorry, I give way to my honourable friend.
I'd like to thank my right honourable friend. Lord Great is also reported as having accused the channel bosses of breaking their legal duty of impartiality and threatening to stage the debates without the Prime Minister. But does that legal duty of impartiality not also include the Democratic Unionist Party represented well in this House, and yet they're including Plaid Cymru, they're including SNP debate across the UK?
I think the honourable gentleman raises a very important point that the noble lord referred to in his article, which is this duty of impartiality that is placed on the BBC and I think is something that other broadcasters should have very, very due and high regard to. And it remains to be seen what actually happens. One of the interesting things and one of the significant things about all of this debate about debates is that people have been very forthright in saying this will happen or that will happen, and the reality turns out to be very, very different. At one moment, the broadcasters assured us there will be 3 debates. This was the first formulation. We shall invite 4 parties, the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, and UKIP, and if you don't turn up to that or agree to this, you will be empty-chaired. And then, of course, they changed their mind on that. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and he's making a powerful case. But isn't the paradox here that we will have party political broadcasts that virtually nobody watches, and we won't have the debates that we had last time that 23 million people watched? Aren't the broadcasters just trying to step into a vacuum that this House has left? And shouldn't this House legislate to ensure that there are fair debates both across the United Kingdom and in the nations and regions of the United Kingdom?
I think that the honourable gentleman raises an important point, and I'll come on to that. And indeed, it's part of the wording of our motion, which is that this has been so badly handled by broadcasters, and undoubtedly political self-interest has raised its head as well. So therefore, there is a need, I think. Whether it's through legislation or not is another matter, but there certainly should be steps taken as a result of this debacle to bring about a situation where there can be a fair and equitable basis for agreeing on proper and fair debates going forward. That does need to happen. I think the experience of what we have gone through makes that point very, very, very strongly. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
The member for giving way, and he's making a very powerful point. And the point about regional differences, he makes very well. And of course, the BBC and commercial stations can indeed put on regional programmes that involve regional politicians. In fact, there are now regional parties emerging in England. There's a North East party now standing in my own seat. Cornwall has a tradition of parties. But does he agree with me that the broadcasters need to have a model which fits all future purposes, whether it's regional broadcast or national broadcast, and which parties do then participate? They need to express a model that makes sense.
I think that what we have seen up to now is a question of, is one of the broadcaster making it up as they go along, responding to pressure here, there, and everywhere, responding to the latest opinion polls. I think in terms of the former exclusion of the Greens and then their inclusion was on the basis of opinion polls, and of course they go up and they go down, and it depends on when you take note of the opinion poll as to whether on that basis somebody should be included or not. So the honourable gentleman makes a very good point, that there does need to be a model designed and brought forward in good time, well before a general election, especially in the context of fixed-term parliaments when everybody knows when the election is going to happen. The model should be one that is brought about by the maximum amount of agreement, and it should be one that sets out fairly and squarely the rules that will apply, come what may. But it needs to be fair to all parties, and it needs to be fair to all regions of the United Kingdom and all countries of the United Kingdom. And we can't have a situation where one country of the United Kingdom is excluded and where one major party in this House is disadvantaged compared to other smaller parties. It just cannot go on the way it is, and I think that the honourable gentleman is absolutely right in that. So we have had this situation where the broadcasters had their first formulation, 3 debates, 4 parties to be involved. They changed their minds. Then they told us that 7 parties would be invited. Not only did they completely change the format that they had proposed, not only did they bin their nonsense that dissidents to the first format would be empty-chaired, they came up with proposals which, among other fascinating things, told us that the broadcasters think that the Liberal Democrats, for instance, and Plaid amount to pretty much the same thing. And I mean no disrespect to either party when I point out to the broadcasters that that isn't in fact the case. There's in fact quite a big difference between the two in terms of size and appeal across the United Kingdom. And that's why, until last week, no one had agreed even to that second unsustainable debate format. Until last week, Labour hadn't agreed, UKIP hadn't agreed. The Liberals were vigorously denouncing the prospect of being relegated to the equivalent of football conference status. And yes, the DUP hadn't agreed either, and we have been absolutely consistent. As I said, in terms of responding to interventions on me earlier in this debate, we can entirely see the case for the parties that Ofcom deem to be the big four debating one another. And one can debate whether Ofcom are right in that and all of that, but that's what they said, so we can see the case for the broadcasters organising a debate on that basis. At a stretch, I suppose, we can see the case for including the Greens. It's certainly arguable. I can see, certainly from the broadcaster's point of view, that would certainly make for much better television to include the Greens, I suspect, than if they're not there. But we cannot and we do not accept that the BBC and other broadcasters can pick and choose which parties from the countries and regions of the UK it deems fit are to attend. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the member for giving way. Would he not also agree that the problem with all of this is that the broadcasters have broken the rationale they had in order simply to include UKIP, rather than sticking with the similar previous elections as the basis on which they would make decisions about who would participate in the debate, and that is where the rot in this process has actually stemmed from?
Yes, the Honourable Lady raises a point that I referred to there in terms of what the Ofcom definition of the big parties, the main parties, should be. Clearly, it's for Ofcom to make their own decisions and to make their own determinations and explain their rationale for that. The Honourable Lady certainly has a point in that, but the fact of the matter is we are where we are with that decision, and it goes back to the point that was made earlier by the Honourable Gentleman opposite, who said that really, in effect, we cannot go on making it up as we go along. We've got to have a set of rules which are clear, rational, clearly fair and understandable, well in advance of the elections themselves, whenever they happen at a general election. I will, yes.
Giving way on that point, and I don't know if he's coming onto this in his speech, but it does raise the question of thresholds, whether such arrangements and models may contain some kind of thresholds, either current representation in this House or some other method. But such a system would have various features that could be explained in advance and then used on every occasion.
The honourable gentleman, yes, is right. That's all certainly part of the debate that should happen, but it should happen well in advance, not in the heat of a general election, not in the run-up to the election itself, when clearly there are so many vested interests, and as we have discovered, people who were previously extremely enthusiastic become less enthusiastic depending on their particular vested interest, and likewise others who may have been not so keen suddenly become very keen indeed.
The honourable gentleman give way.
I will, yes.
Could I thank the right honourable gentleman for North Belfast for giving way? He is making a very compelling argument for his case. Would he also agree with me that the wider body politic and all our constituents right across the community would also like to see us debating the substance, that is, the issues that impact on them on a day-to-day basis and on which the general election will be decided?
Yes, the honourable lady is absolutely right, and that's why it's key. It's very, very important that we have a debate about ensuring that actually happens, because as things stand, it looks likely that the public, who did watch in considerable numbers the debates the last time, will be denied the opportunity to hear the contributions from the various party leaders who could form the government, and indeed to hear from those parties and their leaders who could play a significant role one way or the other, and I'm sure the public would be very interested to hear what would be the priorities for those smaller parties and what is their general outlook and how would they see things shaping up. So I agree with the honourable lady entirely. As I say, Mr. Speaker, at this moment in time, no one has any ideas what debates, if any, are going to occur. The broadcasters can say what they like about being determined to proceed and threats of empty chairing, but there is absolutely no consensus at all that these debates are actually going to occur. But I want to make it very clear to the House and to people beyond the House that we certainly on these benches will not tamely accept any attempt to pick and choose parties to the detriment of Northern Ireland. We are part of the United Kingdom. We play a very significant role in terms of this House. The Democratic Unionist Party has 8 MPs, but there are other members from other parties, and indeed no party, that also play a role here, and they deserve to have their voice heard on behalf of the people they represent, and they should not be excluded from it, especially in the context where the Democratic Unionist Party could actually play a much more significant role on the 8th of May than some of the parties that are actually going to be included in the debates. So people need to know across the United Kingdom where we stand on the national issues. I give way.
I thank the honourable member for allowing me to intervene, and I must say, Mr. Speaker, I agree with virtually everything he said in this debate so far. But can I ask him about the issue of timing? It's a huge concern to me as a candidate that by having the TV debates within the last 3 or 4 weeks, we converted into a sort of a TV X-Factor type business where people just decide looking at a television screen, and the role of the hundreds and hundreds of candidates who are out there campaigning are being completely sidelined by this process if it is in the last few weeks. And I think the timing issue, maybe I'll be coming on to this in his speech, but I do think the timing issue of not having these debates in the short campaign, when it devalues the role of all the other candidates, is an important one.
The gentleman makes an important point, and it is something that I think should be discussed in a wider context in terms of setting forward a model for how these debates should be run in future. The timing issue is extremely important. I have a lot of sympathy with what the honourable gentleman has to say about the effect of these big debates and the amount of attention that they get, and in terms of the argument put forward by the Prime Minister about sucking the life out of the campaign, particularly local campaigns. Having said that, I also, however, have a lot of sympathy with the view that there is a lot of interest amongst the public about having these kinds of debates among people who may be potentially the Prime Minister or in the government. So it's a question of balancing that, and one of the issues in terms of balancing that may well be looking at when these debates should happen in timing. I'm not going to be prescriptive about that. I think we should, again, this is something that should be talked about, that we should have an independent model which looks at all of that, and we should discuss it and debate it. But I think that just saying that we should go along with what the broadcasters have outlined because they believe that this is the right approach, and that anyone who disagrees with it doesn't have the interests of the wider public at heart is wrong. That is not, I believe, the right approach. It is a question of balance. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He's alluded to the point that this party, its members, could actually have a say after the 8th of May on who walks into Downing Street as Prime Minister. That being the case, isn't it only right and proper that the national audience know where smaller parties like my party stand on the issues of national defence, on the issue of the union, on the issue of grammar school education, on issues of healthcare, taxation, the cost of living and defence spending? And if the public are entitled to know that, then that will help them decide which party should help create or form the next government.
Yes, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. I mean, it is in the interests of the people throughout the United Kingdom to hear, if we're going to hear the views of the SNP, if we're going to hear the views of Plaid Cymru, then it is absolutely right that people should hear what are the views of the Democratic Unionist Party and others in terms of the national issues, because this could have a major impact in terms of the next Parliament. Now, one of the arguments that the broadcasters, and when we met the BBC in Belfast, the leader of my party, Peter Robinson, and myself, one of the arguments that they put forward is, well, we include the SNP and we've included Plaid in addition to UKIP, the Greens and the 3 major national parties. We've included them, but it would be very difficult now to include the DUP. We recognise the strength of your numbers. We recognise the role that you could play in the next Parliament. We recognise you have more votes than Plaid. We recognise you have more seats than Plaid. We recognise that, unlike some of the parties in this House, you are genuinely going to weigh up the options after the election on the basis of proposals that come forward. You're not in the pocket of any party. You haven't already sold your vote. You haven't already said that you're going to oppose the Tories come what may, or that you're going to never go into coalition with the Labour Party. All of that is perfectly valid, But it would be very difficult to broadcast a debate because we have to invite all the Northern Ireland parties and that would make it very unwieldy. Put directly in front of them should be something raised above the level of partisan squabbling or media meddling. And even at this late hour, Mr. Speaker, if I may say so, a Speakers' Conference would start taking us to where we need to go, and that's seeing that an independent commission is established to superintend debates of this kind. Of course the public want to hear from us, but they must hear from us fairly, without bias, and without the blatant incompetence that we have seen heretofore getting in the way. Across the world, Mr. Speaker, broadcasters work with independent commissions arranging political debates like this. And you know what? The end result is that in other countries these sorts of debates happen. Whereas here, it seems to be a case that the broadcasters know best. They know how to organise the debates. They proceed to go ahead and try to do so on their terms. And what's the end result? Chaos, confusion, and a total inability, 8 weeks out from the general election, to have any idea what's happening about any of these debates.
I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Does he accept what, once again, the noble lord has said, that the BBC and the broadcasters are not the guardians of democracy? Yeah, and in actual fact, he also said that they are unequivocally playing politics. Surely that is not the position of an independent BBC, and therefore an independent body to arrange such debates is certainly required.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman again raises an important point. We have to remember that we are sent to this House, elected by the people, to speak for the people, and it's our role to ensure that we do that. And we need to take some responsibility in all of this in terms of learning the lessons out of this debacle and going forward on the basis of something that will actually make debates happen in future, but do so on the basis of a model which sets aside the organisation and the formulation of these debates from broadcasters and from politicians. I want, Mr. Speaker, debates to happen. I sense that many, many members and members of the public on both sides of the House want debates to happen as well. The public want to see their politicians in front of them at the appropriate juncture to debate the issues. And the tragedy is that the reality is that at the moment it's the broadcasters who are getting in the way of this happening. I just want to conclude by the right honourable gentleman for Lagan Valley referred earlier during Northern Ireland questions to the late Lord Molyneux of Killeed, who, and I want to just in this debate add my tribute as leader of the DUP group here at Westminster to him, because as a distinguished and valiant member of this House for many years, I know that Jim Molyneux would have relished the excitable mess, as he would have put it, that everybody has got themselves into. And he was a man who would have been counselling quiet, getting people together and counselling them to sit down and calmly and rationally find a way through it with a sense of authority. And he was a man, I think, who was almost born an elder statesman. He didn't grow into the role. But he was someone who wanted people to engage in politics in sentences, in paragraphs, rather than in sound bites. And that's what these debates should be about. We should be looking to place serious, coherent, cogent arguments in front of the public. And that is one of the reasons why I believe in the debate. I believe that Prime Minister's question time sadly has become an exchange of sound bites to a large extent, and all sound and fury and very little elucidation and light at times. I give way to the right honourable gentleman.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. The other thing that the Lord Molyneux was adept at was in the last hung Parliament, where Unionists held the balance of power. He showed that Ulster men, and indeed women, when the occasion arises, are very good at doing politics.
The right honourable gentleman raises a very, very pertinent point, but I think that's a debate for another day in terms of what we might come on to. But you're quite right. He was very, very adept at that indeed. But Mr. Speaker, to conclude, my party will obviously always stand up for Northern Ireland. And in raising this matter today, we are standing against the illogical and unreasonable attempt by some broadcasters to exclude us from the debates. But the issue is wider than just us. Who are these debates for? Are they for the people who take part in them alone? Are they for the people who so desperately want to make them? No, Mr. Speaker, they are not. They are for the people who watch them and then decide whether we come back to this place. If the broadcasters can't be trusted with putting the interests of the voters first in all parts of the United Kingdom, we have to remember our historic role. We speak for the people because we're elected by the people, and others should never dare presume to get in the way of the people when they're trying to hear their elected representatives speak and debate one another. I commend the motion to that.
The question is as